I'd like to welcome you all to the second breakout session for this afternoon. And here we're looking at the role of agriculture in driving natural recovery. And I suppose from my own perspective, I see agriculture having a key role in addressing our biodiversity crisis. It has to be part of the solution, if we consider that over 60% of our land is under agricultural use. So we have to work with farmers and the broader industry to achieve the solutions we need. To introduce myself, Ted Massey is my name. I am Senior Inspector in the Department of Agriculture, responsible for biodiversity and water quality. That's a relatively new role for me. I only started in the post in the middle of January. And I suppose going back to before that, I grew up on a small mixed farm in Wicklow. And I suppose that probably stimulated my overall interest in biodiversity. From a young age, I spent a lot of time out with my grandfather in particular, I suppose looking at nature and that kind of thing. Went on to study ag science in UCD and then started work with the Department of Agriculture a little over 20 years ago now. Started off implementing controls around agri-environmental schemes, and I suppose the environment has never been far away from the sort of work I've had over those 20 years. More recently, I was involved in the CAP negotiations and coordinating development of the green architecture for Ireland's draft CAP strategic plan. So as I said earlier this year, I moved on to work in nitrates and biodiversity division. For this session, the conference organisers have asked us to address three core questions. One, what are the key actions required of the agriculture sector to ensure a positive outcome is delivered for biodiversity? Two, how can the sector best support delivery of those actions? And then three, what opportunities exist for developing or strengthening cross-sectoral partnerships for biodiversity? So I suppose I'd like you all to keep those three questions in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to them later on. I'm delighted to say we have four speakers here joining us physically in the room now for the session. And they are Pamela Boyle, Daire, Douglas McMilan and Patricia Deane. So after each of their presentations, we're then going to open it up to a broad panel discussion and then a Q&A. And I'm really hoping those of you that are online and also in the room will really engage with that so we can have a good participative and open discussion. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Pamela Boyle. Dr. Pamela Boyle is the head ecologist working with me in the Department of Agriculture within Biodiversity Division. She has a speciality in agroecology and extensive farming systems, with several years' experience in the development and implementation of agri-environmental policy, including a recent stint with the Land Use Division within the European Commission's DG Environment. During her time in Brussels, she contributed to development of the forthcoming Common Agricultural Policy, and then she returned to work with us in Ireland in February of this year. So over to you, Pamela.
Thanks very much, Ted. So thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to join you here today and to speak to you and have a discussion about how agriculture plays a role in driving nature recovery. And I hope you'll forgive me for starting the presentation on a slightly negative note. But we're all more than familiar with the negative headlines of biodiversity decline linked to agricultural activity. But what I want to focus on today is the actions that the Department of Agriculture and their relevant stakeholders are taking to act for nature now, and also what we plan to do in the future as we progress. So at the moment, many of you will be familiar with the schemes that are run underneath the current CAP programming period. The one that most of you will be familiar with is the Green Low Carbon Agri-Environmental Scheme, which takes the form of a more traditional agri-environmental scheme in the form of prescriptive action for farmers to deliver actions on their farm, beneficial for biodiversity and water quality, soil health, etc. We also have the Organic Farming Scheme, which, although has a very low uptake at present, has a very important role to play in the reduction of artificial inputs such as chemical fertilisers and pesticides. And recently we have announced changes to the eligibility criteria of this scheme to make it more accessible and achievable for farmers to deliver under this scheme. During the transition period between the forthcoming CAP programming period and the current programming period, we've also had the opportunity to launch several other pilot agri-environmental schemes, which you may not be as familiar with. So this includes the Results-Based Environment Agri-Pilot Programme, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we call it REAP. This is the dipping the toe of the Department of Agriculture for the first time into results-based schemes. And combined with the agri-environmental training scheme, which incorporates a significant training element on biodiversity on farmlands for farmers, is resulting in an increased interest in farmers and indeed their advisors in biodiversity on farms. Coupled with that, we are currently running the Farm Environmental Survey. The FEST programme will be the first time that we've run a survey of environmental habitats on farm. This will cover approximately 5% of the farmers in the country. And whilst it sounds a small number, is the stepping stone to develop this further. And we'll be able to link this in with the land cover map, which is due to be released by our colleagues in OSI and EPA, to be able to get a feel for the level of habitat cover in terms of semi-natural habitat cover on farms. This also has a significant knowledge exchange element to the survey programme, where the advisors go through a significant training programme, and they relay the information back to the farmer on the farm during the farm walk. So it's very engaged. There's a lot of interest from the farmer side, but also from the advisory side, and is a signal of the change in perceptions of agri-environmental schemes in Ireland. Further to this, we have several pilot projects that are funded through the Department of Agriculture, and many of you in the room today take part in some of those programmes, and they are very much results-based, farmer-led and bottom-up, which means that the schemes themselves are designed with a lot of engagement from the farmer themselves. There's a lot of work gone through the programme teams in developing and delivering and engaging with the farmers on site. And this has made such a significant difference to the interest of farmers in such schemes and their appreciation for environment on their farms. We also are associated beneficiaries on several LIFE projects, and this has been a new step for the Department of Agriculture in supporting results-based schemes and in a more targeted and localised manner. These have been getting significant interest and buy-in from farmers on the ground, but also from the department ourselves and other government agencies and our other stakeholders also. So where are we going? Some of you probably don't agree, but I find the new green architecture of the Common Agriculture Policy to be particularly exciting. It's giving us a huge scope for a change in agriculture policy across Europe. The CAP to date has been similar to a boulder rolling down a hill with a significant focus on food production only. And as we look forward down the path that this boulder is rolling, we see that it's going to land right in our house at the bottom of the hill. So the Common Agriculture Policy changes in recent years, in recent programming periods, has shifted the focus more towards the environment and climate, which has given us a slowdown in the momentum towards food production. And the current proposed CAP programming period will now give us the leveraging stick to redirect the boulder so that we can also deliver for environment and climate, which is a significant shift in the agricultural policy, which is the main funder for biodiversity across Europe at present. The elements that are particularly novel under the new programming period are the enhanced conditionality, eco schemes, and how they link in with the agri-environmental schemes. So in the draft CAP strategic plan for Ireland, our enhanced conditionality has subsumed our greening measures, which were previously acknowledged as not delivering significant benefits widely for the environment, but also builds on that. So there is a solid legal basis for farmers to deliver for environment and climate on their farms. On top of that, in our proposals for the eco scheme, what is particularly novel in this is that underneath the traditional Pillar 1 of the Common Agriculture Policy, we now have a clear financial trigger for farmers to deliver for environment and climate, as 25% of the direct payment budget is ring-fenced for actions suitable for climate and environment. In Ireland, we envisage that this will mean at least 80% of our farmers will start delivering under their basic actions on their farms for climate and environment. And the benefit of the eco scheme beyond the traditional agri-environmental scheme is that this is an annual payment. This gives us as the department, who are the main implementers of the policy in Ireland, the opportunity to revise the actions as needed, to develop them as needed, as we see a need for environment and climate going forward. Or if we see a significant cohort of farmers who are not engaging in this activity, we can find ways to incentivise them to take part in these actions. Further on from that then, in the traditional Pillar 2, we will have the agri-environmental scheme, where we'll be implementing the lessons learned, both from the existing GLOS scheme, but also from the EIP schemes, to develop a general agri-environmental scheme similar to GLOS, but using the lessons learned to make it more beneficial for environment and climate. And what is particularly exciting is the cooperation project AACMs. So this will allow us to develop agri-environmental schemes targeted to specific issues in specific regions across the country, and will have a significant results-based element in their delivery. This is the first time that the Department of Agriculture has undertaken to deliver results-based on a national scale. And it's with thanks to colleagues in this room that we have got to this point to date, and we hope will result in the successful delivery of the scheme. So I focused primarily on the green architecture of the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, but underpinning all of that is the elements of knowledge transfer between farmers, between different stakeholders, including government agencies, the development of well-educated and in terms of environmental components of the advisory, which is ongoing. We have had several training events with advisors so that they are becoming more familiar with the results-based agri-environmental scheme process, but also more aware of the environment and climate actions that are needed on farms and the reasons why we need them. And we will again be rolling out EIPs, the open call for which will be rolled out this time next year, to continue the good work that the EIPs have delivered to date. So beyond the CAP, there are several measures that we need to consider. We also need to consider the research element, and that's both internally through the Department of Agriculture. So for example, we have an open call at the moment for joint research applications on agro-biodiversity, and also with our external partners, such as our colleagues in Teagasc, who will present later today, to identify the knowledge gaps that exist and try to address them. We're also looking at ways of innovation for farmers on farm to apply new technologies, maybe apply traditional approaches in new ways, and to address new ways of farming, including carbon farming, which my colleague Douglas McMilan will discuss in his presentation. Communication, we have found through the EIPs and the discussions on developing the CAP strategic plan to be key to everything. The work that the EIPs have done has been phenomenal. This has been carried on in the LIFE projects that have started and some of the other regionally based traditional schemes where they've had the opportunity to communicate with the farmers. We've learned so much from the people that are managing the land for us in what can and can't be applied. In terms of policy or funding or any other element, it has to come down to the communication at the end of it. And it needs to be a whole of government and whole of society approach. So by this I mean we need better communication between our own department with other government departments, which I've seen even in recent years improving, particularly between our colleagues in National Parks and Wildlife. And also a whole of society approach. So farmers need to have the opportunity to contribute to this discussion just as much as the government officials, but also so too do the people that live in these areas. The rural communities also need an opportunity to input into the development of agri-environmental schemes and into their implementation. And finally, it all comes down to funding at the end of the day. So we need to have appropriately funded agri-environmental schemes to make sure that we get the uptake that we need and that the funding is located in the right places at the right time. But we also need to look at funding streams outside of the Common Agriculture Policy. Whilst it is the largest funder for biodiversity action in Europe at the moment, it's not the only fund. And we need to try and leverage money through other research facilities or also other funds such as the Just Transition Fund. And we also need to ensure that we get business buy-in from other partners in the industry to ensure a sustainable future for our farmers, for nature and for the rural communities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pamela, and I suppose a very good scene setting the context for this afternoon. And I suppose what really struck me was your final slide there where you talked about communication. and that whole of government, whole of society approach. So supposed to keep things moving, to move on to our second speaker, Daire O'Hullacán, who is a Senior Research Officer within Teagasc Environmental Soils and Land Use Department, with over 20 years research experience. Daire's research focuses strongly on agroecology, evaluating agri-environmental measures and designing novel measures for inclusion in regional and national agri-environmental schemes. His research incorporates measures and management to maintain and enhance habitat quantity and quality, covering a gradient of farming intensities from our intensive farms to our high nature value farms. So over to you, Daire. Thank you.
So dosach tá go hinnta a bheith seo agus bhar an buchas den Deane bhí gagrú seo as Cora Horchom. It's great to be back at conferences again and seeing people in person as opposed to having to rely on Zoom meetings. So I kind of build on some of what Pamela has presented, not as in-depthly as she has done, but again seeing what actions can be undertaken and what progress can be undertaken now from an agricultural point of view, trying to reverse some of the declines in farmland biodiversity. I think you can kind of judge the age of a room when you use a title like this. I've used the title before giving it to students and gone straight over their heads. So obviously Shakespeare isn't as prominent as he used to be. So we're familiar with the background here. We're familiar with the global decline in biodiversity. Around about the time of the last conference, we had the UN Global Assessment of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services highlighting this significant decline in global biodiversity. 1 million species were threatened with extinction because of anthropogenic activities. We're also familiar with most of the significant drivers, the factors of these declines: exploitations of species, climate change, pollution, alien invasive species. So again, these are the drivers of global biodiversity decline, but they're also the drivers of national biodiversity decline. And the biggest decline, the biggest driver, the biggest factor is land use change, has the largest negative impact on ecosystem services and on ecosystems. And whilst we're familiar with significant land use change, when we picture land use change, we're picturing something like this, maybe where there's destruction of rainforests in the Amazon, trying to make way for agricultural land. Within our own landscape, we're also removing our own rainforest, shall we say, such as upland heaths, again, making room and making changes from an agricultural point of view. So these are having significant impacts on biodiversity, on the quantity, and also on the quality of habitats and their ability to deliver ecosystem services. Against this backdrop of decades of declining biodiversity, we've had various pieces of environmental policies, numerous pieces of ecological policy going all the way back to Ramsar Convention and Habitats Directives back in the 70s, Birds Directives back in the 70s. More recently, we've seen updates of the Wildlife Act and we've seen national biodiversity plans. Unfortunately, these have been unsuccessful in reversing the decline. They may have slowed the decline on occasion, but they haven't succeeded in stopping the decline. Hence, it's becoming increasingly important, the role of agricultural policy in trying to drive this halting of decline. And we're seeing greater focus on biodiversity within agricultural policy. So we've seen iterations of the CAP, again putting greater and greater focus on biodiversity and habitats, not just within Pillar 2, but also moving now towards Pillar 1, as Pamela highlighted. We're seeing evolutions of the Green Deal. Since our last conference, we've seen the presentation of the Farm to Fork strategy and the EU biodiversity strategy that were launched on the same day, that were significantly integrated with one another. Again, showing the significant role of agriculture in relation to retaining biodiversity within our landscapes, but also the role that biodiversity can play in relation to delivering a sustainable agriculture. So there are opportunities now and in current CAP strategic plans, but we can't pause at where we are with CAP strategic plans. We have to keep looking towards the future and future iterations of CAP strategic plans such that we can feed into those plans in 2027 and beyond. So, in relation to biodiversity needs, there are various things that biodiversity needs, and one of them is space for nature. So we need quantity of habitats. And this has been highlighted in the Farm to Fork strategy, it's been highlighted in the EU biodiversity strategy, and this figure of 10% non-productive features has frequently been floated as this kind of initial step that agricultural land can do to deliver quantity of biodiversity. From an Irish point of view, it's been incorporated into our food vision for 2030. Again, striving towards this 10% space for nature. So where are we currently looking at in relation to our CAP strategic plans? Well, for a start, it's welcome that we're seeing this space for nature being incorporated within Pillar 1 or within conditionality. It's floated at a relatively low base, shall we say, but again, it's being extended to all farmlands, or it's being proposed that it's extended to all farmlands as opposed to what would have happened under previous iterations of CAP, where it would have been directed especially towards arable land, for example. So it's welcome now that it's been extended towards all farmland. 4% is being floated in conditionality. We're seeing greater focus within the eco scheme, so we're seeing 7% is being floated for eco scheme measure 1. So, and again, probably the most rewarding, or whoops, this seems to have, there we go. The most, if Pamela was excited about some of the CAP strategic plans, the most exciting part of Pillar 1 CAP strategic plan is this 10% for eco schemes in relation to space for nature for our farmers. So farmers with greater than this 10% fulfill their eco scheme objectives. So how many of our farmers are at that point? How many of our farmers are going to automatically reach conditionality? Or will there be significant efforts required to get some of these maybe more intensive farmers up to 4%? Well, it's difficult to know. We don't have a national landscape map. We're still waiting for this much promised national landscape map, and the sooner we get it, the better. So we're depending on smaller scale regional size projects or third level size projects, trying to get a handle on where we currently stand in relation to our biodiversity quantity. And Teagasc, with colleagues in GMIT and TCD and DCU under the Farm Ecos project, undertake this study. Sorry, just get a glass of water. On a gradient of farming intensities from our intensive farms right through our extensive farms in two regions of the northwest and the southeast. And we're seeing on our intensive farms about 6 or 7% of our farm area was biodiversity habitats, or habitats with no weighting factor or no conversion factor. This is just semi-natural habitats on your land. So again, slightly surprising, higher than I expected, higher than I anticipated in relation to our intensive farms. Intermediate is up to about 15% in these sample regions, and then our extensive farms, unsurprisingly, have a significant amount up to about 30%. So the question then, if we're setting this conditionality at 4%, well, on the one side, it's encouraging that most of our farmers are going to exceed this 4%. It's recognising that Irish farmers are doing their bit to retain habitats. But on the flip side, then you start to wonder, well, what is the additionality? What is the extra that we're going to get under these new CAP? And we want to avoid commentary, like Pamela mentioned previously, about elements like greening has led to very little or limited change in relation to farming practices. So this was a report by the European Court of Auditors, or similarly a report again, a different report by the European Court of Auditors, that most CAP funding has led to little positive impact in relation to biodiversity. So we don't want to be at this position with similar commentary in 4, 5, 6 years down the line. So these are some of the challenges that we need to explore. How do we drag up those farms that are falling significantly below this 4% conditionality? But equally, on the flip side, how do we appropriately reward those farms that are significantly exceeding this 4% conditionality limit in relation to Pillar 1? So that's one element, and quantity is one significant element in relation to retaining biodiversity. A second element is in relation to the diversity of habitats. And again, Ireland has a variety of different habitats. We would have seen images of them in presentations this morning and this afternoon, highlighting and showcasing some of these fantastic habitats that we do have. So again, as part of the Farm Ecos project, we split our habitats, our semi-natural habitats that you typically find within agricultural landscape, things like hedgerows, tree lines, drainage ditches, ponds, streams, all the usual habitats that you might expect to encounter within a farmland. But you can split these into 3 broad categories. And the first category are those that are valued. These are policy values, these habitats. Habitats such as hedgerows, tree lines and drainage ditches are valued under the CAP strategic plans, are valued and for decades have been valued under common agricultural policy as landscape features. Farmers are rewarded and incentivised for retaining them, and there's policy to prevent them from being removed from agricultural land. The second group then is we have these optionally valued habitats. There are options to value them under agricultural policy. Many of these kind of lighter blue colour habitats can be selected as part of a gloss or could have been selected previously under ecological focus areas. So there's the option to incentivise the retention of these habitats from a farmer's point of view, but on the flip side, policy isn't that strong to prevent them from being removed. So there was nothing to stop, for example, field copses or earth banks from being removed from agricultural land. So there are the two top categories. But then we have this large group of habitats at the bottom that are undervalued or typically ignored by agricultural policy. Bracken, heath, so other than those that are designated heath and peatlands, woodland, scrubland, ponds, streams. Ponds have been highlighted in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 as an important agricultural habitat, but up to now they have been kind of ignored by policy. There's been no incentive for farmers to retain these heretofore on their land. There's been a kind of perverse incentive to remove them from your land and replace them with one of the other habitats that's further up the list that are valued by policy. Despite the fact that habitats like woodland are just as important as hedgerows from a biodiversity point of view, or just as important for carbon storage, or that our peatlands and our ponds are just as important from a water quality point of view as some of those that are further up the list. So when we looked at our survey of farms within intensive, intermediate and extensive, you now see this changing category in relation to how policy can inform the retention of some of these habitats within our landscape. There's not that much difference between intensive, intermediate or extensive when it comes to our valued habitats. About, 4 or 5%, regardless of your intensity gradient, is devoted to these valued habitats. When we start looking at our optional habitats, we're now losing these within our intensive land. Many of our intensive farmers are not opting to go into an agri-environment scheme, so therefore they're not being retained within their landscape, and there's been decades of this. We're also seeing that they're constituting an important part of our intermediate farmland and our extensive farmland, but again, there's a gradient from our extensive right through to our intensive. And the most challenging one then is our undervalued and our ignored habitats. They're nearly gone, or they're disappearing again from our intermediate and our intensive farms, but they still constitute a significant proportion of our extensive farms, more than the other two types of habitat types. And the danger here, particularly with our extensive farms, is in the absence of policy even recognising the value of some of these habitats, or that was at the time of the study. There's a danger on the one side that if these farmlands, these very extensive farmlands are abandoned, these important habitat types might be lost because of succession and because of scrub encroachment. And on the flip side, there's the danger if these extensive farms are intensified, then we're going to lose these undervalued or ignored habitats. But again, it highlights the role that policy can play in retaining diversity of different habitats. A third important point is in relation to the quality of habitats. And unfortunately, for 20 or 30 years of CAP, habitat quality has kind of been ignored. There hasn't been a strong drive in relation to habitat quality. A hedgerow such as this that is overly managed and topped and tailed and trimmed and cut within an inch of its life, that's probably about as wide and as high as this podium, was valued more or less as much as this species-rich, a flowering, pollinator-rich hedgerow that's also sequestering significant amounts of carbon. So there was a lost opportunity under previous CAPs in relation to start valuing and assessing and rewarding the quality of some of these habitats. Unfortunately, still as part of conditionality, we're not probably focusing sufficiently in relation to quality of habitat under Pillar 1. In our eco schemes, there may have been a missed opportunity when it comes to looking at habitat quality. Okay, there have been efforts in relation to habitat quantity and increasing habitat quantity, but maybe there's a missed opportunity in relation to habitat quality. And we're always better to retain what we have and improve what we have, as opposed to replacing habitats with a newer habitat or trying to implement new habitats. Whoops. And again, when we undertook surveys of some of these common habitats to see what's the quality of these habitats, we looked at hedgerows on intensive, now must be said, very intensive beef and dairy farms, and using the Folks et al. Appraisal system, which is a pretty robust and rigorous appraisal system, it should be said. When we assessed our hedgerows across this gradient, across this enterprise type, we're seeing that, unsurprisingly, because quality wasn't really rewarded or valued that much, the majority of the hedgerows were the quality was low, typically through overmanagement, occasionally through undermanagement. We're seeing a smaller amount of habitat of hedgerows were of moderate quality. There were, again, a small amount of habitats that were of good quality, and it must be stated that these were despite policy not rewarding the habitats to be of good quality. This is of farmers doing things off their own bat. So that's maybe a missed opportunity when it comes to Pillar 1. Luckily, when it does come to quality, and I'm probably being overly negative when it comes to policy heretofore, we have great opportunities now, as Pamela highlighted, when it comes to looking to the future in relation to our habitat quality. Ireland is a leader when it comes to results-based payments. We have 20 or 30 years of results-based approaches going all the way back to some of the life projects in the Burn Life. And we know, others will speak about this, we know of the success and we know of the value of these results-based approaches. Some of these have been collated in recent literature by John Finn and Eileen O'Rourke. And looking at this deep green conservation approach, looking at locally targeted and with specific objectives when it comes to biodiversity or habitat, looking at giving specialised advice to support these specific local outcomes that we have, and looking at rapid monitoring of the outcomes, and again, that results in payment associated with these, whatever the environmental objective is. So we've years and years of looking at this, and it's fantastic to see the focus now within Pillar 2 in particular in relation to the quality and the efforts that are being directed towards these cooperative projects, and looking at the cooperative project within AECM. And for years we've been saying, well, we know these things work. We've been listening to Brendan and his colleagues and others saying, we know these results-based payments approaches work. We need to direct more money towards them. So now that more money has been directed towards them, it's incumbent on all of us who are working in various parts of, be it research or policy or advice or practice, to undertake as much effort as we can to support the delivery of these results-based approaches within the 8 or 9 cooperative projects that are being targeted. There's also opportunities then further down the line to ensure that the right measure is going in the right place. As we're looking now towards EIPs, looking at water quality and things like that, ensure that the right mitigation measure is going in the right place. Ensure that the right tree is going to the right place if we're looking at carbon sequestration approaches. Also, now there's future opportunities in relation to further develop and revise our scorecards. Now that we've, as Pamela says, dipped our toe into the reap, now we can put the whole leg maybe into the water when it comes to reap. And for increased ambition. So I know it's always difficult to get our toe in the door in some of these schemes and these approaches to try and get mindsets working with us. But now that we've got that toe in the door, we can increase and enhance our ambitions when it comes to what are the environmental objectives we're striving for. And we also now start looking at integrated ecosystem services, the potential of these habitats to deliver multiple ecosystem services. Now, whilst there are potential, there is also gaps here in relation to future research that is needed and future policy direction. We always kind of think of biodiversity and the multiple ecosystem services that are associated with biodiversity and the multiple ecosystem services that are associated with various habitat types, and looking at synergies between these habitats or synergies within a habitat to deliver multiple ecosystem services. And the big one we'd always flag is the potential of hedgerows to deliver for biodiversity, but also for water quality. And more recently, we're seeing with a different farm, Carbon Dug, a different farm project, looking at the potential of these hedgerows to deliver from a carbon point of view. So that's good, but we need more of that work. Looking at various other types of habitat that have the potential to deliver multiple ecosystem services synergistically. On the flip side, it's also important to identify that there are going to be trade-offs. There are some habitats that can't deliver everything. And we need to undertake additional research in this area to identify these regions for trade-off and then to start exploring what can be done when it comes to a trade-off. So when we start looking at, for example, the area of Ireland that is targeted towards HNV or high nature value farmland, and the areas, my colours are bad so I call it green, along the west coast here, which we are typically associating with high nature value farmland. And we know high nature value farmland delivers the most when it comes to water quality and carbon storage and biodiversity benefits. Now, when it comes to other ecosystem services in relation to productive services, this paler colour, so this is in relation to the productivity from an agricultural point of view, in relation to farm incomes, we can see that these areas are often associated with lower farm incomes because there's an obvious trade-off between productive services on one side and some of the more environmental services. So that's one very vast difference when it comes to different ecosystem services. But even within environmental policy, there's going to be trade-offs in relation to our ecosystem services. Una or someone mentioned questions in relation to, well, how are we going to target trees in relation to achieving future ambitions with targeting, enhancing tree planting for carbon sequestration that aren't going to impact on some of our breeding wader sites, for example. So we have to be cognizant of the trade-offs when it comes to productive services, but even within environmental services, there are potential trade-offs there as well. And again, we need policy and others to start recognising the ecosystem services and the potential of delivery of ecosystem services associated with these sites. But it's not all incumbent on policy to try and deliver this. If we want these things, if we want to be truly sustainable when it comes to producing sustainable produce from farmland that is multifunctional and is delivering multiple ecosystem services, well, the market has a very important role to play as well. So market value, enhancing market products in some way can complement and further add value to public payments that are coming through CAP or some of the agri-environment schemes, for example. We can look towards developing specific criteria or standards when it comes to biodiversity. They've done it in the UK with the RSPB farm to nature approach, looking at standards when it comes to biodiversity, looking at standards when it comes to pesticide usage and things like that as well. Why is it that we have had 20 or 30 years of agri-environment schemes in Ireland, but you could never go out and buy a pound of Reps beef or a litre of Gloss milk? So also, there are opportunities when it comes to paying a premium for some of these produce. Other farm produce get a premium, be it milk, be it beef, be it arable. If you produce malting barley, you will get a premium for your malting barley. If you produce more fat in your milk, you will get a premium for that. We need to start exploring now, paying a premium for those habitats that are delivering greater biodiversity, sequestering more carbon or producing more clean water for us all to use. Also, there are opportunities with this market approach is to enhance, coming from an agricultural background, to enhance the public perception in relation to farming, to demonstrate, well, some land can produce multiple ecosystem services, but then we need to provide a premium if we want to retain some of these. And again, another reason we could explore it is because it's a specific aim of the farm to fork strategy. So again, it's not just relying on policy to deliver these ecosystem services or deliver payments that pay for some of these ecosystem services. It's looking at market value approaches as well. Unfortunately, there are multiple gaps. There's a reason that this hasn't happened for the last 20 or 30 years. There's scale and there's product and things like that. But it's incumbent again on those of us working in research and policy and advice in education and practice to further explore some of these potential opportunities when it comes to market value. So Shin, conclusions are quantity, retain what we have, look towards policy for incentivising those who are retaining quantity, greater diversity. I often laugh that, for example, there's a big drive always to have more and more hedges on farmland, but hedges aren't the golden solution. Like fish don't like hedges, for example. So enhance habitat quality, looking at integrated ecosystem services, identifying some of the synergies and trade-offs that are there, and then looking at valuing some of these ecosystem services, be it through policy or be it through market, from IGE.
Thanks very much, Daire. For me, that really captured the challenges facing agricultural policy from a biodiversity perspective, but also the opportunities that are there as well. And most importantly, I suppose, the role of industry, and how it's not just an issue for the CAP, it has to be broader than that. So now I'd like to introduce our third speaker, Douglas McMilan, who is the co-founder of Restoration Ireland and project manager of the Farm Carbon EIP. He's going to share some of the innovations he's developing along with his team in the field of carbon farming. So over to you, Douglas.
Thanks, Ed. I hope I deliver now after that introduction. Right, thanks very much for inviting me anyway, first of all. Great privilege to be here. Just very quickly, Green Restoration Ireland is a cooperative we set up. I just think the cooperative approach is a good way to do things. Obviously, it's got a lot of roots in agriculture, so that's where we're coming from. And that was set up in 2019, and we started working with peatlands in Mayo and helping landowners re-wet bogs up there. So we would have done that, and then we put into this, and we got this project. So just to pitch in, I suppose, the aim, I suppose, obviously, as we're all saying, there's fantastic work being done by all the IPs. I suppose I've got maybe more of a science bent. So I think the before and after, and actually obviously overlapping a lot with what Daire was saying, trying to quantify what's happening if we do a particular measure, what result is it going to give in terms of increased carbon storage, biodiversity improvements, water quality. It's pretty ambitious, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And just in terms of the range, so obviously the core of it is it's farmed peatlands. So essentially peatland are being probably cut away and then converted to pasture. But we took the opportunity to look at all the range of different peatland habitats on the 23 or so farms that we have, just in terms of where they are. So we have 3 catchments, so the Silver, the Little Brosna and the Campker in and around Offaly, but also extending a little bit into North Tip and into Laois. And we're essentially looking at the quality of the peat and the habitat across. So we're using as, I suppose, the baseline intact raised bog is kind of the healthiest ecosystem function you could get. Damaged raised bog, which include Daires, which is designated, and Ballinamoe would actually be a smaller bog, which isn't designated, but is right for restoration. Cut over bog in and around those. We also collected soil samples on the industrial cutaways. Obviously, we're not going to be restoring them. That's up to Bord na Móna, but we just took the opportunity to collect the data, to try and get some data there, again, just to see another type of degraded peat use. Kind of naturally regenerated woodland on cutaway. So again, once you cut and drain the bog, it dries out. It's very easy. Willow, pine, birch come in very quickly. And there's a very common misconception, as we were saying, I think Daire, you were saying about trees in the right place or something. Oh, trees, that's great. No, the bog is dying. When the trees are coming in on the bog is kind of in big trouble. And then, of course, plantation forestry, of which there is a lot in Offaly. So, again, there's an issue around that. So, ash, sycamore, and then spruce and lodgepole pine were the different plantation types we had. And then I just kind of classified them as semi-natural pasture, which would be kind of species-rich, high-mix grasses and flowers growing on fen peat generally, and then rough grazing. But that's essentially been left go wild, and it's probably halfway to scrub. So it's kind of developed into thick tussocks of grasses and briars and so on are coming in. And then, of course, we have the reseeded improved grassland. We didn't get any arable land in the mix of farms. We have the 23 farms there. So that's what we were looking at. What we want to do is assess the baselines. So we're looking at the biodiversity across those habitats. Also, we're doing a second round. We're not just doing the peat areas, we're doing the whole farm. But just for the sake of this, we'll look at the peaty bits. So biodiversity, we've used, you can see my colleague there, Mark, Dr. Heaton, he's a very energetic man, pushing about 8 metres down with his peat probes there. So that's on Kilcarran Ferville Bog, very deep. So there's very huge carbon storage in there, but also where the cutaway hasn't been so systematic, there's very large stores of carbon as well. So we've identified the areas in the amount of carbon stored within those different areas of the farms. We're looking at the peat soil chemistry, and we're also looking at the microbes and the fungi and the nematodes that would be instrumental in eating the peat, I suppose, and converting it into, because it's all undegraded plant material, which is converted into CO2 or DOC in the waterways. Greenhouse gas emissions, so working with NASCO. Hopefully we'll have an eddy covariance tower coming in the autumn. Soil water levels, water quality, and costings as well. So, and then the idea is that if we can look after we've done the re-wetting, so where the fields, everyone's signed up to, all of the farmers actually are all happy to do either full re-wetting or partial re-wetting, which I suppose would be kind of half blocking the drains, not fully blocking them. So they're all keen. And then what we're aiming for is to try and quantify we just call it the 3 pillars, again, just echoing what Daire was saying: biodiversity, soil carbon storage, health. Again, maybe you could use soil organic carbon as a proxy for good soil. Outside of, obviously, peat, and the condition of that is important, but then outside of that as well, the mineral soils, the water quality. And then the idea is trying to get some objective evidence so that we know if a particular measure is implemented on a farm, we can anticipate this is approximately what amount of good that it's going to do in terms of the project, in terms of environmental performance. Just very briefly, my father is an inventor, so and I did the alpha testing on this. I've always wanted to put it to good use. So he has technology. We reckon we'll be able to do in situ soil organic carbon measurements, which will be very good. That will speed things up. That will certainly help quantify the carbon storage on our farms. So that's just a quick slide on that. And then we have a software for that. So that's the output of this EU project that he led. And then we also have, we're going to try with Shannon measures, because obviously, you're dealing with different parameters. You're looking at biodiversity, you're looking at water quality, soil quality. It's apples, pears, oranges. You know, you're going to have loads of different tables and stuff. So we also have an approach to Shannonizing that, converting it all to bits, so zeros and ones, so that you have the same measure for everything. So we're going to use all of the data we get from all the standard approaches, quadrats, you know, chemical analysis, etc. We'll convert it all, and we will use that to try and see if we can't screen for the most important factors that may be influencing the environmental performance of the habitat in question. And we'll be putting that in a Shannon depository. We're also using, so we have a partnership with the UK. I suppose they're way ahead in terms of peatland restoration. So work with North Pennines AONB, and they use drone technologies. Again, I've spent you saw my colleague Mark there. I've spent many's the hour trugging around on Mayo bogs in all weathers, just doing random sampling, and you don't even have a fraction of what you're looking at. So what they do there is they use the drones to capture the whole area and then try and analyze it and determine how much sphagnum, heather, and so on. So unfortunately, you may have heard, first of all, there's been a global microchip shortage, which meant that was delayed, and then we managed to get 2 brand new broken drones delivered. So we're hoping at the end of the week we'll have a functioning drone, because we've done the training. We've been waiting to go. And then we think if that goes well, assuming that goes well, there's also LiDAR drones, so you can estimate the above ground biomass. So that would actually give you a full carbon footprint for the farm, we would hope. Peatland catchment characterization, so working with Dr. Eric Melander, he's head of the Ag Catchments program. So he's helping us and his colleague David Ryan. We're installing 2 sons, so XO1 sons, measuring these parameters, conductivity, pH stability and FDOM, so DOC in the waterways, and then grab samples just to get the nutrients and the DOC in the water, and maybe just do a bit of profiling as well. So this would actually be, Perrick is very excited, this is the first peatland catchment he'll have done in Ireland. So we'll have it on the Silver River, which has, so upland, this is the site there, it's up near Lumcloon in the Sleeve Looms. So that will be one of the tributaries of the Silver River. And then we'll have the other one, we have the other one already installed at the meeting of the waters near Daire near Clonaslee in Laois. And incidentally, looking at the map, so it was very interesting, because actually there was only one river there originally, the Silver, and the other 2 rivers meeting are bog drains. So from Daire and Boyle and Daire's bog. So that's an artificial meeting of the waters. And then we have automated water sampling. So again, this will help us identify what the inputs are, groundwater, surface water, into what's going on in the river, and help build an understanding of what's happening. And we'll be doing kick sampling as well, of course. We're also looking at the peatland, again, with our partners in the UK. We'd be working with them, but essentially the idea of a peatland code, again, Daire was talking about industry inputs, and again, I suppose part of my background would be management system standards, so I'm very familiar with this. This is completely my language, and businesses want assurance. So third-party assurance of one of these standards would be excellent. So there's a UK peatland code you can see there with up in the top left. There's a Dutch one. There's the German one. This is a site in Mayo, Lacadoff Bog, that we've been working with the landowner to re-wet. So we've done a baseline project plan as per the peatland code while we're waiting to come up with something else. But essentially, the method is use the vegetation as a proxy for what the greenhouse gas emission levels are. So if there's a healthy bog, lots of sphagnum, normally it should be sequestering small amounts of carbon. In a dry year, it might release a bit, but generally it will sequester. But then as the bog gets drained and degraded, the emissions, CO2 emissions, will go up. And just to give you an idea, again, a lot of people don't realize how much, so you're familiar with the giant redwood forests in California, in the bogs, there's multiples of that. So, a healthy bog would certainly may have 4,000, 5,000 tons of carbon in it, and the cutaway would have very significant quantities as well. So, and just very briefly, also, the idea, I think it's a much safer bet. We've all seen the fires everywhere around the world, and we're all familiar with tree planting and tree offsets and so on, and probably a lot of those have been going up in smoke. In relation to that's future selling. You're planting an area of land, you're saying this is the quality of the soil, this is a oak pine mix, and this will sequester X tons of carbon over the next 50 years. With the bog, it's already there, you're back selling. So if you can re-wet it, then you're locking that in. I think it's a much safer bet, and that's the kind of thing that industry would like as well, obviously. So that's part of the idea. We're also with Vera, so they would be the international body that do a lot of the offsetting projects, American-based. So again, I suppose in recognition of the fact, as we're all, this is kind of repeated time and time again, it's grand. We have a plantation here, we have a nice bit of farmland there. It needs to be a bigger scale. So they come up with this land scale framework. So it's essentially a sustainability footprint, and obviously it's overlapping a lot with the land cover maps and so on. But we've done we're not quite finished, but over the next couple of weeks we should be done on that for a map of a sustainability map for County Offaly. And as you can see, you're looking at the ecosystem quality, human well-being, governance, and production. So these are the different factors. Just in terms of the re-wetting options, so again, it's all voluntary. We have all, as I said, all of the farmers want to re-wet something anyway, some less than others, but they're all on board for that, which is great. So that's going to give us a range of different experiments, if you like, because I suppose just talking to the lads in re-wet, Professor Fenton and so on, it's kind of a bit of a suck it and see approach. There's a lot of experience in re-wetting bogs, but maybe re-wetting peat pastures. We'll block the ends of the drain here and see how it goes, and then we'll come back and do something else kind of thing. So it's great to have a range of different farms and field sizes and so on to work with. So anyway, the first one obviously is re-wetting, maybe rewilding. Can we, put it back? But also, that could be for grazing as well. Wet grassland is, as we know, it's a key habitat for your curlews and redshanks and lapwings, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So that will be one of the options. Partial re-wetting. So again, as I said, a lot of these drains that make the fields farmable, if you like, are very deep, 2, 3, 4 meters deep. So even if you just partially wet them, as they do in Holland, with their carbon offsetting standard, bring the water table up to within maybe 50 centimetres of surface as opposed to having it 2 metres down, that may have a benefit. So again, some of our farmers would be more in favour of that, the more productive ones. Polluter so we have a collaboration. We're doing a feasibility study with Typha Technic. You can see at the bottom there, so cattails or Typha angustifolia is a very it produces a lot of, it's the one that so it has we probably call it bulrushes, mistakenly we call it bulrushes in Ireland, I suppose, but that's the colloquial term. So it kind of has the cigar-shaped seed heads. So the angustifolia species produces more produces more biomass, I suppose. And that has a lot of very important properties. Essentially, what gives the cattail its strength is it's filled with air-filled cells, which give it a lot of structural strength, a lot of significant amount of fire resistance, and of course it's totally biodegradable as well. So essentially they have a technology patented where you can chop it up and remold it as a kind of insulating board. So we'll be doing a feasibility study with them. And I think we'll also look at maybe other options as well, so maybe fodder grasses or something. So I think reed canary grass and so on are good, so we'll try that also. Another thing that kind of emerged, again, Daire, you were saying things kind of crop up, or Pamela maybe was saying that things kind of fall out as you're doing stuff you don't know before you start. But one of the things that became clear was, scrub coming in. So again, the farmers not knowing might think, oh, I'll leave that be, and that's a good thing. But actually, when you get the scrub coming in on peat, you might have an emissions factor of several tons of CO2 per hectare per year. But then, of course, each of those gorses and willows, they're all giant wicks drying out the peat. So the factor of CO2 emissions goes up to 19 tons according to per hectare per year, according to one of the studies here in Ireland. So actually clearing that fairly low biodiversity value scrub, converting it back to wet grassland again, and then the farmer, of course, gets more area that they can use. That's also quite a popular option as well. So we'll be trying that. Again, we can't touch the creature plantations, although a lot of them are on very deep peat, which are many, many multiples the amount of carbon that those forests are ever going to store. That's if they stop getting wind thrown. But there are the regenerated cutaways, so we'll be re-wetting those where we can, where the willow and and the idea there is that if you're actually clearing that, these are very significant woodlands, essentially maturing to kind of oak woodland, with big oak trees. So if you went in clear filling that, it probably would be a lot of mess. So the idea, if we can re-wet it at least and see if that has an effect on the emissions. And then quite excitingly, one of the bogs, this small bog, is about 9,900 acres. We have 3 of the farmers around the edge of the bog in the programme. And they reckon there's 25 landowners. 23 are quite happy to re-wet. 2 would be not over their dead body, but we can re-wet around them. So the idea is that we'll put together a programme to try and encourage them to re-wet. And again, we have an industry partner who works with this in Mayo, who might provide volunteer and support and so on for doing that. So that's that. Whole farm. So obviously it's a whole farm approach. So this is just one of the draft plans there. So what we're looking for is again, as Daire was saying, is do the right thing in the right place. So it's very farm specific. What would be most beneficial from a biodiversity point of view. And essentially we're looking at its pasture, bog, fen, cutaway, scrub, woodland, and the waterways, so the drainage ditches and the rivers flowing through the farmland. So we're essentially measuring it all, getting the length of ditches, hedges, and so on. We also think it's important to, again, the same thing, is evaluate the condition of the hedgerows. Because again, there's a lot of good hedgerows, but there's a lot of really messed up hedgerows as well, either through overcutting, where they're cut down and down every year, or just left essentially to grow into a line of trees where they no longer perform a function of a hedgerow. So the idea then is that we can try and quantify the whole farm from the carbon storage point of view. So some of the measures, so I just got that point there. So multi-species sward, so it's got a lot of press at the moment. And again, just kind of what came out was a lot of the farmers, oh, great, I want to do a multi-species sward here, please. And when we went and looked, we had a lovely old, now it was obviously, it had lost a lot of species, it had been fertilised, but it had lovely old meadow. So actually what we convinced them to do was to try the mob grazing to get a higher yield rather than to plough it all up and sow a mix of ryegrass and red clover, which is what one of the other farmers did. Unfortunately, we didn't get to him in time. So just to make the point. So again, and again, they want to do the right thing, but they don't know, so they don't have the knowledge. So again, that intervention to provide, actually, please don't touch that. Leave that as be, and we'll see if we can do something with it. Is instrumental in saving, as Daire was saying, we want to keep what we have and or improve it, so obviously then with the idea there was we tried mob grazing as an approach, and again we have one of the farmers who's been practicing with that for the last 7 or 8 years, so he's kind of advising us on that score. And then of course obviously one of the key concerns of farmers, which we're very sensitive to, is if you are doing any re-wetting, then there's the danger of spillover onto the surrounding lands. So again, the multi-species swards and or the mob grazing will be a way of increasing infiltration capacity in those areas if it was less good mineral fields next to that. And obviously as part of that will be removing livestock from the rivers. So we might have solar pumps to pull them away from the rivers and split up the fields into smaller compartments. As I said, peak scrub clearance and then pond and wetland creation and so on. So this is some of the other things that we're doing. So again, same point. Copses, there's a lot of in Offaly. There's some lovely habitat in there. There's some very nice kind of woodland, but it's just scrubby. But it has all of the rare woodland flora, and it probably has a nice hazel understory with sycamore and or dying ash in it. So the proposal there is that we'll plant in, oak and appropriate species to kind of upgrade it to a proper woodland habitat. And again, that's fairly popular. And again, hedgerow repair. So again, we have a hedge layer. He's Irish champion from Yorkshire. So he'll be laying the hedges and planting them up where the gaps are too bad, where you can't save them, Again, just a couple of things in that part of the country. You get Irish white beam as a native. So we've got 4 nice trees there, and we also have alder buckthorn, which is quite a rare native tree species. So again, some of the farmers are keen to collect and propagate. So again, we can expand, make them less rare by spreading them across the farms. And then also, so what's interesting with the farmers is kind of, I think when you do a good job, then suddenly they have other farms that they want to show you. It's very fragmented in Offaly, the farming patterns, So have a look here and, okay, you haven't seen my other farm. And then you go there and there's this lovely kind of Esker meadow with cowslips and orchids and everything. So we got some very nice sources, local sources of grasses and flowers. And again, certain farmers are very keen that we can collect the seed. And where other farmers maybe want to create a wildflower meadow, we can do it with the local seed. So we're looking forward to doing that. Yeah, so again, as I said, just as a kind of recap, economic alternatives that we want to try and quantify, the measure to produce these benefits. Hopefully with the Shannon approach, we will be able to start analysing what's going to deliver the best results. Because, obviously we're funded to a fairly high level that we can evaluate everything. That's not going to be feasible. We want to be identifying what is the key. So let's, just for the sake of argument, if there's 10 groups of microbes and fungi, maybe a particular group, a particular characteristic of a healthy peat soil or a degraded peat soil and so on. So we can hone in on what we need to monitor and what we can ignore. And then, as I said, the idea with the peat depth thing and with the drone surveying is we can get a whole farm carbon footprint. And then the idea of that then is, if we were talking about external, industry marketing contributions, that it's a high quality carbon offset, not to kind of clear all the locals off the land and plant a load of eucalypts. It's integrated. We need the biodiversity, it's with the goodwill of the farmer, and we're getting all of the environmental services. So that's the approach. And again, the idea would be, and again, this is quite exactly, again, echoing a whole load of what Daire was saying, why can't we buy reps beef? So what about eco or peatland friendly beef, so whereby the farm is managed in such a way that all the peatland habitats are restored, the hedgerows are in good condition, maybe they're doing mob grazing, they have zero or very little inputs, so this is very popular with the farmers. So and again, just other ideas we have, again, you can only do so much, there's only so many hours in a day, but we have social media, so again, you can look at our websites and follow us, that would be great. But certainly I do forest school. Well, I don't have time at the moment. But bog school is fantastic. Bogs, and again, you can see Catherine there has done fantastic work with IPCC, have been doing all of this great education work. So bog school should be a great education resource for the local schools. And again, that will bring the local community into the habitats and give them an understanding. Because there's nothing more fun than getting up in your wet gear, obviously, and running around on the bog. It's a great crack. Kids always have fun. And then ecotourism, nature trails. So again, we have a number of farms who are near to each other and or have neighbouring farms that would be interested in joining the scheme if it expanded in the future. So I think there's definitely scope. And I think Offaly is a very underexploited county in terms of the tourism potential. So I think ecotourism, nature trails, there's fantastic potential for that in there. Just discussion points. Again, I took them out of the format for the what we were supposed to talk about today. I don't think I talked directly about it, but I had a few points. So obviously we're talking about policy and practical aspects. So obviously, again, from our point of view, they're indissoluble. The same things driving the climate crisis is exactly the same things destroying the 6 mass extinctions. So they're inextricably linked, and there shouldn't be any attempt to separate them, in our opinion. And again, we were talking about cross-cutting issues. So I mentioned, obviously, a few alternative agricultural practices and maybe new products, so peatland-friendly beef, cattails, new fodder from wet agriculture. And, of course, the thing with wet agriculture is the silver bullet. You're locking the carbon in, and then maybe you're creating, like cattails is a valuable ecological habitat, which is great for biodiversity, and you're sequestering carbon, So new products. As I said, alternative forestry policies, trees on deep peat or, more than a metre deep. There's a lot more carbon in the peat than there is ever going to be in the trees, which are of questionable quality from a wood production point of view. And then, of course, associated business opportunities, so eco-food offsets for businesses that want to go carbon neutral, whatever, ecotourism education. And then, so just the last points then. Yes, it's just get people involved, so inform as much as they're asking, give as much information as you can, get the communities involved as possible, have proper consideration of what their concerns are, and protect their rights. And what we found in Mayo and Offaly is there's a real hunger. People want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do. So if we can be there to provide them with the right advice, policy framework, and information, there's no shortage of people out there farmers that want to do things. I've never had a get off my land scenario when I'm talking to any of these guys. So I think that should be respectfully nurtured, and that's I think there's thousands of farmers out there that would be willing to do this if they had the right incentives. And again, as you said, support, advice, information, awareness, training. And again, I think, and that was echoed earlier today, someone was talking about Mary Robinson. I think in terms of selling it, if we're into environment, we get very excited, so many tons of carbon and species, blah, blah, blah. That's not for everybody. I think the approach is selling it as a right to clean air, a right to clean food, a right to clean water, a healthy environment. I think that's a very effective way of selling it to people, selling it or promoting it to people as well. That's it. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Douglas. I suppose, summarise, your innovations are really stimulating my imagination. So thanks very much for that. Our final speaker today is a lady who's travelled all the way from South Kerry to join us. Patricia Deane grew up on a mixed traditional farm on the Dingle Peninsula, and I suppose that gave her the advantage of having the experience and understanding to allow her successfully engage with farmers. Over the years, Patricia has worked on a number of diverse roles, and most recently, she is now working as project manager for the McGillicuddy Reeks EIP. So, over to you, Patricia.
So, guys, I had to throw on the glasses because I wasn't sure if I'd see the screen without the glasses. So, it's absolutely wonderful to be back here again. I was here back in 2019, and I suppose if you asked me to talk about can we deliver, I'd be saying, don't know, not too sure. Now, having worked on an agri-environmental project on one of these European Innovation Partnership projects since, absolutely. There is a huge appetite out there from the farmers. They are wanting to and willing to deliver for us. Okay, so I think that's very positive. So, yeah, looking at where we are, what we need to do in driving, and agriculture, obviously, and we say obviously, it's not obvious to everybody the role that agriculture has to play, because people still look at agriculture as food production, and they don't look at it always, when I'm talking to people. So I work for the local development company, South Kerry Development Partnership. I love showing off this photograph of the McGillicuddy Reeks because people go, that's not Ireland. Yes, lads, it is. That's the McGillicuddy Reeks in all its glory, okay? And that's just to, I suppose, highlight to you as well as some of the challenges that we'd face. So I work as part of a project of two. We have a part-time administrator, part-time ecologist, and we started back in 2018, towards the end of 2018, and we're going to the end of this year. And we're supported, obviously, by a very good and very strong operation group, and obviously the Department of Agriculture. So it's one of the EIP projects that Pamela mentioned earlier. We also have lots of other partners there, okay? So, lads, by the way, I meant to say at the start, if anybody wants to get up, or shake or anything, because you must be kind of, exhausted from sitting there. It's very warm inside in the room now, so no problem, I'll take no notice. So, lads, I suppose just to give you a bit of context, I suppose to look forward, it's always helpful to look back, where we've come from. And I always felt, and a lot of it was down to visiting the Burn many years ago and meeting the two lads, the little gods that live up there, Brendan and Michael, and kind of saying, well, my God, if they can do it here, we can definitely do it in the Reeks. And I think that inspiration is very important as well, because you could talk to one person, and I know where Douglas is going to be going, lads, on his summer holidays. He's going to be coming to Kerry to do some peatland assessments for Patricia. A working holiday, Douglas, don't worry about it. So I suppose just to look back, I suppose we were looking at, and this is what we were looking at, the terrain. It's quite obvious now, the climate, and we'll argue that with everybody in the country. We do get a hell of a lot of rain down in Kerry. Succession issues, and this is something that I'll come back to as well. We are looking at a challenge in upland farmings, particularly in the farming systems. They're not economically viable. It's very challenging to get young people engaged with farming, and that's going to be a big concern for us going forward. Okay. Obviously, the work that you'll undertake in these areas is really labour intensive, okay? And that's not exactly a draw. If you can go in, you can get a wage at the end of every week and you can go to a job. Well, why in God's name then would you go off gathering sheep maybe for 2 weeks and, be at the mercy of the market, So it's very hard. And obviously then, because it's the McGillicuddy Reeks that we're working on, huge recreational impact as well on the ground. So these were all issues that were identified at the very outset, okay? So what do we aim to do? Well, what we were looking at, guys, is improving the sustainability and the economic viability of farming, okay? That's very important. If it won't pay, people won't do it. If it's not sustainable, they're not going to do it either. How? There was no point coming up with a plan and handing it to farmers. The farmers had to have input into it. It had to be achievable. Again, the actions have to work on the ground. So we all talked about it. We heard it numerous times, the right measure in the right place. And because it's an innovation partnership project, we had to come up with innovative things that weren't done before. Does that make sense? Yeah, I don't see anyone asleep yet until I'm scanning, you know, that I have the glasses on, I can see people. Okay, why are we doing it? A lot of our land in the McGill similar to a lot of the upland areas in the rest of the country, is special area conservation. It's Natura 2000 area, okay? But again, I will talk about it and I'll be blue in the face from saying it. We have to work closely with the people that own the land. So I often give the analogy, lads, how many of you here, show of hands, how many people would know how to make a Victoria sponge cake? There's a few of you. God, that's more than I anticipated. God! Fine, I'll pick a harder one. Give me a creme brulee. Could anyone just concoct that now without a recipe? It's a hard thing to do. So, ladies, you're letting the side down. Come on now. Jesus, I must reconcoct this analogy for the next presentation. We take it for granted that the farmers know what the habitats and species are. When we met with our farmers first, a tiny, tiny percentage, maybe 3 to 5% of the farmers knew what the land was designated for. How in God's name do we expect them to manage the land, protect it, if they don't know what they're managing it and protecting it for? Does that make sense? So what I feel very strongly in is actually training, education and awareness. It's really, really important, but with the people on the ground. Because, lads, we can put all the plans together. We can spend this entire weekend all agreeing with each other and saying we're all wonderful, we're doing great work. There is no point putting a plan down on paper and putting it on a shelf. It has to be delivered on the ground. So, this is our little area. It looks small. It's not that small. We didn't bring everybody in, lads. It's about 10,000 hectares, okay? Just under 10,000 hectares. Majority is a special area conservation, and it's also the only upland UNESCO biosphere designation in Ireland. We have one other UNESCO designation, and that's the Dublin Bay Biosphere, okay? So what did we do? Every year we draw up an annual plan. We learn from the plans. We said, what worked last year? What didn't work? What should we include in it? What haven't we included? And that's very important. And we work with commonage and non-commonage farmers. Big tracts of land for the most part on the commonages. And obviously not everybody's best friends, lads. So there's obviously politics at play as well, you know, trying to get the cooperation of farmers working across a big area of land. So listening to our farmers is very important. But I think we're the vehicle there. Like I said, you don't need to be best friends. You could have had an argument 30 years ago. You could have had an argument 80 years ago. We don't know what happened to the dog. We don't care. We want to improve the condition of the land. Okay? So that's very important. And again, when we're looking at our SAC, what is our SAC designated for? It's wet heath, dry heath and areas of blanket bog. And we are also working, and Derek spoke about it earlier, and the results-based habitat assessment, because it's something that we can actually say to the farmer, does this make sense to you? So what we do is we bring the farmers out on the ground. We show them how we score their land so they can understand it. It has to be fair to them, so it's better if they understand what we're looking for. And they're getting it. They're having a light bulb moment. So we'll talk a bit more about that. So what were the issues when we talked to the farmers? Well, they were like bracken. God, Trish, the bracken destroying the place, taking over. What are we going to do with it? Gorse management, again, because these were things that they would have been penalised for in the past, and they were concerned that they were going to have an impact, again, on their payments. And a lot of it is the concern for trying to hold on to those payments. Controlled burning. Quite a few of our farmers said to us initially, we need to do controlled burn. We went out. We made the mistake of telling everyone, the farmers, that we were going to walk all their land. Lads, just, you know, for yourselves, make sure you know how many people have applied first before you kind of say that you're going to do that. We spent quite a lot of time walking. But when we looked at the ground, the burning didn't need to be done. You know, so again, it was very important. If we hadn't walked it, we wouldn't have known that. So that's really, really important. Rhododendron ponticum. Just warning, lads, if anybody tells me this is a beautiful plant, be prepared for the black eye that will come shortly thereafter. It may be beautiful, but it is an absolute invasive species, and Derek talked about this earlier as well. Huge issue for us, okay? It loves the peaty, acidic soils. If it gets into an area, if you can see it flowering, now is a great time, lads, when you're going back home now again. If you can see it flowering anywhere, we all have a role here to tell people, get rid of it now. It is not going to not grow because a project is not in an area. It does not respect boundaries. It will spread and spread and spread. And it is an absolute massive problem in terms of biodiversity. Does that make sense? And I'm going to show you lovely examples and pictures of that just in case you don't believe me. Okay? Purple moorgrass and the management of that, or fanon we call it in Kerry. The management of mature and degenerate heather. And obviously we've lots of reasons as well why we have some areas that aren't being grazed as effectively as others. And obviously I mentioned recreation. And then, guys, the biggest issue for the farmers, where are we going to get the time to deal with all of this? You know, a lot of them are part-time farmers. There are very few full-time farmers left and very few young farmers getting involved in farming, okay? So we said, right, what are the possible solutions? Training, training, training. Does anyone have all the answers to this? What is the best way to deal with bracken? We were like, Jesus, you know, scrub, what do we do with the gorse? You know, if seed stays in the ground for 40 years, you know, we can get rid of it this year. Is it going to be back next year? There is no quick answer to any of these things. So we said, we have to give you training. We have to look at what works. Maybe not everything will work. But again, it's innovation. Let's try a few different techniques and see what works best. Okay? So we looked at different things. Spraying. A lot of people would say, Jesus, not with the pesticides or the herbicides, the glyphosates. Sometimes, guys, a bit like the rhododendron, maybe nothing else will work. You know, we wouldn't use it unless we had to use it. Cutting, trampling the bracken, they were different techniques. Each area is slightly different. Obviously, if you're alongside a watercourse, you're not going to be going in spraying. Cutting, again, you look at the terrain, you know, you're not going to maybe treat all the bracken. You could be looking at it on a slope. You don't want erosion occurring. So you have to look at the right measure in the right place. Trampling was always seen as an effective method, and cutting this year. Cutting gorse or grazing with cattle to open it up. We said we'd try a few of these initiatives. Setting up collective groups. And this was very, very, very important for us. What we found, guys, again, and went down to the nature of the farming, the age of the farmers that we're working with, not having the time available to them. We talked about sustainability. And sustainability and biodiversity kind of get my nerves sometimes, though, towards, because they're used so often, we kind of lose the meaning of them. But we said, what needs to be done in the right way environmentally? What do we do to keep the economic return locally? And what do we need socially to keep people in the area? So we set up these little collective groups. I'm going to show you a little picture of the lads out working. And they have great fun out working. And they're company. And lads, who wants to be working by themselves all day, every day? You'd soon get sick of your own company. Well, I know I would anyway, but maybe you're all very different. So there's a social side to this as well. So controlled grazing, and this is very important as well, because sometimes people look at an area of land and they'll say that's overgrazed or it's undergrazed. Different species. It could be overgrazed for one, it could be undergrazed for another. Okay. So we did different initiatives, fencing off areas, and we use the collars now, so there's actually no need for fencing, which is coming at a good time, because the cost of fencing this year, lads, it's double since last year. So these are all going to be prohibitive factors going forward if we don't look at new innovations and new technologies. Okay. And cutting mature heather. Now, people, when we said to the farmers first, you're going to be cutting heather by hand, you know, they were like, are you serious? I'm like, well, you're going to get paid. And then you got, okay, so we'll try it. Okay, so it's the incentivisation of a lot of these things, and that's going to be very important. If we want these areas to be managed, we want them to be managed appropriately, it's going to have to pay. You know, most people don't go to work, lads, unless they're getting a paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month. Farmers are no different, you know. But then we used some of the brash afterwards for the mature heather. We used that for treating the bracken areas. So we're trying to be sustainable and kind of, you know, circular as possible. And obviously then when I mentioned recreation, path maintenance and restoration. Okay, but again, it's all based all the time. You want to improve that score. You want to improve the condition of the habitat, and that goes back to what Daire said earlier about the quality as well. Okay, and obviously a very dedicated team. So that's a little look back. So just to show you a couple of pictures of controlled grazing. So what would you say immediately about that? There's not an awful lot going on in that, is there? Nope. So this was one area, and the farmer was very proud that it was well grazed. And I was like, well grazed is an understatement. It could be a bloody golf course. So we were kind of trying to come around, and we asked him, and he agreed, fence off an area, 20 hectares. Big ask now. So that was taking a huge ask for him, an area that's not going to be available to you now for at least 12 months to allow it to recover. Not every farmer is going to be able to do that. But again, we were we'll incentivise it. Will you see an improvement in yourself? So after 12 months, lads, that's the comparison, the inside and the outside. So you can see there the dwarf shrubs and things like that, and the heather starting to come back in there again. And again, like I said, a lot of the cattle would be gone from the upland areas. You know, very few upland areas would have cattle anymore. That's just because economically it didn't pay to hold on to the cattle. And again, cattle we know are very important because they will graze differently to sheep. They'll graze at a different time of the year. And for the management of the fanon, the purple moor grass or the millennia, they're very important there for summer grazing, okay? Because the millennia can be quite a fuel source for fire. And what do we want, lads? We don't want wildfires in our upland areas. So these areas have been managed. They need to continue being managed unless we want to look at wildfire. Does that make sense? Yeah. bracken management, so there's one of the guys, they were out, very labour intensive guys, any of this kind of work. I mean, you're talking about, I think it's something like 36 knapsacks, 16 litres a go to do 1 hectare of bracken management. And I mean, you're looking at trying to get water as well. So like, tell anyone, and you've 120 days, well, you had, the derogation is now finished, I think, for the use of Aslox is what we were using. But again, guys, trying to find a dry day, a calm day on a mountain when people are available to do the work, very, very labour and time consuming, okay? But again, we used dye so we could see what was done and what wasn't done. That's why he appears blue like a smurf. It's because we put dye in just to see what was done, okay? Cutting back, so we said we knew that the derogation for Aslox wasn't going to continue on forever, and then we looked at the efficiency as well of the spraying, and depending on the density of the bracken, you don't always get a good clearance rate in it anyway. So we said, what else could be done? So we said we might try and cut it back instead. So we sent the boys up with their strimmers and we said, do this instead. It had its benefits. You could see the result straight away. You could also do it any day. The summer, like, you didn't need a dry day to do it. You could do it in a pretty miserable old day, so you didn't have the same constraints. So we're looking at the pros and cons, but the downside is you do have to go back and you have to do it a number of years. But again, no different to anything else. There's no quick solution. You have to do continuous management anyway, no matter what you're doing in the upland areas. And then trampling. So where the infestation level was kind of light, trampling would be effective. But what we learned very quickly was if there was a high infestation level, the cattle don't like going into it. They'll rest in there because it's nice dry ground, but they don't like going in there. We tried to plough moss them in there with mineral licks and things, but that didn't really work. Okay. So looking at purple moorgrass, again, guys, like, the big constraint you're looking at when you're looking at an upland areas is you might not always have water available. So, like, what are they doing, pray tell? You know that the 2 lads were involved with the Kerry Mountain Rescue because they were bringing the IBC tank up there by hand. But we needed water to be made available to have the cattle out, because obviously you're looking at animal welfare issues as well. So you need to make sure there's plenty of clean water. And obviously for the bracken spraying, when we were doing the bracken spraying, we said, well, doesn't plenty of water fall from the sky? So for a good while there, the reeks were covered in little blue barrels. So we were collecting rainwater, just so they wouldn't have to carry water as far. There'd be water available to them. Okay. And ramp pump. A ramp pump was a thing that we came back that apparently was years ago. Doesn't need anything at all, only a good flow from water course. So you don't need any solar panels. You don't need to be concerned about anything like that. So my dear brother, who's a bit of an engineer, was like, go on, make a few, we'll try it. Okay. So there you can see the cattle very happily grazing. Heather management, we tried a little robo-cut machine, so it's a remote control machine. As you can see there in the background, we didn't take it up on one of the fields. That'd be too easy. We said we'd take it right up the side of the commonage on a fine cold day when the snow was down above us and it was hailstoning. But this went right up the side of the mountain, and we'd see, could this work? Could it work for heather management? Could it work for bracken management? Could it work for gorse management? Because again, we're thinking down the road, long term, what's going to happen? So we said, would it be an option? Very expensive piece of kit. We were trying to bring contractors in to see would the contractors maybe buy one, We were just trying to be, it would be there for us down the road. Nobody's taken the bait yet, unfortunately. But again, what we looked at, we cut an area of very, very degenerate, mature heather, very, very strong, very tall. Probably wouldn't have been good for anything like the grouse anymore because it was just too high. But we looked at it afterwards and we'll go back and we'll revisit it again this year to see if there's any new stuff coming up. But when it's that dense and when there's that much cover, it'd probably stop a lot of the new growth coming up. It'll probably take a while. So there's pros and cons to absolutely everything we're doing. Yeah, I'll run nearly there. Cutting degenerate heather by hand, I mentioned that already. And obviously then using the heather brush to reseed areas where we had treated bracken. Okay. So my friend, the rhododendron, huge amount of work and effort, lads, into mapping areas where there was rhododendron. We couldn't just tell the Department of Agriculture, give us a few bob there, we did a bit of treatment of rhododendron, we needed to quantify exactly what was where and the level of infestation. So you can see there, one of those sites, lads, is about 99.47 hectares of a level 5 infestation level of rhododendron. So it's a severe problem for us on the West Coast. Just loves the acidic soil. So that's an example of a map then that we'd put together for the farmer, just to give him an idea of, not to scare the bejeepers out of him, but, just to say, this is what's here now. And then we can obviously map it. We can map the improvements. Or if we don't get to do anything, we can also map this is what it was at this time. Okay. So there you go, guys. When you obviously treat rhododendron, then you have to think what you're going to do with the rhododendron afterwards. Okay, so it's a very good fuel, actually. So we were kind of saying, anyone want to take it away home, maybe? I shouldn't be saying that. Charcoal. Yeah, coming to that now, Douglas. Oh, yeah. Oh, you're definitely getting a job in Kerry. So this is what we were doing. Obviously, guys, in some of the areas we are working in as well, it doesn't look the greatest to leave this after you, like in some of the key kind of iconic tourist areas. So we said, what would we do? So again, we got a local engineer to make a little burning frame. Every farmer we know has corrugated sheets of iron hanging around their farm. So we said we'd have a little burning frame. We're going to protect our moss layer. We didn't want to burn on the ground because you'd end up with great big black areas. It would look absolutely awful. So we said we'd burn off the ground and we'd see, could we look at maybe charcoal or something like that? So that needs a bit more exploration. But I suppose any issues can be tackled if they're done together. And this is going back to the collective. And I talked about sustainability, and this works very well. So these aren't actually participant farmers in our project at all. They're contracted in. We give them all the training. We show them how to use and apply the herbicide. Obviously, they had to do all their PPE. It's very important. The health implications, the environmental implications of using things like this. But they did it. Now there's a little source of employment for them locally. And they have the skills and the know-how, how to treat it properly and, in the right way. Because a lot of people were trying to foliar spraying it. Unfortunately, foliar spraying and rhododendron just don't work. Okay, so the collective we found is definitely the way to go. Build the skills locally, create the local education, awareness, and then people will respond to it. And then finally, we're nearly there, don't it? I talked about path maintenance and restoration. So obviously with our numbers, everybody wants to get on the bucket list, climb Carnthool, so we get a huge amount of visitors. And obviously this was having a big impact on these habitats in our SAC. So we had to look at trying to do some restoration work. Okay, so there's some before and after for you. It's not just the reeks, and this is what it's very important to point out as well, as when you're talking about upland management. There's huge erosion across the country, and this is just examples. Thank you, Helen, for providing the pictures a couple of years ago, I think, at this stage. But like from Donegal, lads, to Wicklow to Mayo, these are upland areas, and you can see there, this problem is not going to go either by itself, And this is obviously an issue as well when we talk about carbon and we talk about carbon storage. And so it all links together. Everything has to be looked at. So again, guys, because a lot of people aren't aware, you might be visiting the Reeks for the very first time. We don't want dogs. It's farmed land. There's sheep on this mountain. There could be cattle on the mountain as well. It's unenclosed for the most part. Your sheep could be driven miles and miles away from you. So we said, what will we do to create a positive impact here? So instead of going up to you telling you, Ted, you cannot bring your dog, get out here, or Ted, you shouldn't be wearing sandals to try and climb. Sorry, I'm picking on Ted. But we just said, what would we do positively? So we said we'd gather some data. So instead of going up and telling people you can't do this, you can't do that, we went more at the carrot. We do a quick survey with people, we gather some data, find out, is the knowledge there? Do you know you're entering private land? Do you know that this land is designated? It's very important to be able to gather that data as well, okay? And training and awareness with our farmers, guys. And this is absolutely vitally important. We cannot hope to change anything if we don't work with our farmers on the ground, okay? So we put a huge amount of time and effort into working on with the farmers. The whole community, we tried to make the training available to as many people as possible, and a diversity of training as well then to deal with the issues that they came to us with, okay? So I suppose, and not just the farmers, like I said, the whole community. So from primary, post-primary, third level, we bring everybody up the mountain, down the mountain, and for a tour around into the schools, the colleges, the whole lot. We try to cover as much as possible because these are the people of the future that are going to be in these areas. We want them to continue the tradition of farming, but we need to have them interested in it. So we need to make sure, going forward, we have to tell the farmers what we want and how to get there. We can't assume that they know it already. We have to incentivise the change, and that's very, very important. That's why the results-based works, but it always needs to be supported for those larger landscape measures. Young people must be encouraged into farming. I'm very, very concerned about that, particularly in upland areas, because it is getting very, very challenging now to try and encourage them into it. Hard work must be rewarded. Schemes must be flexible and adaptable, and that's very important. And that's what we had under the EIP projects. There was great flexibility and adaptability. We could move budgets around when we needed to. We could put the budgets where we needed to get the address. And I think personally myself, the animals need to be the tool, because we are trying to focus on, creating a market. I know lads coming right alongside Killarney, hoteliers inside Killarney. There's a lot of hotels, and they're looking at their bottom line. They'll get the produce where they can get the cheapest produce. They won't always necessarily go with the best produce, and that's a reality we have to kind of consider as well. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I didn't put you all to sleep. And if you want to...
Thanks very much, Patricia. I don't think there's any fear of us going to sleep. I suppose going back to the question I asked at the start, the key actions required for the agriculture sector to ensure a positive outcome is delivered for biodiversity. And listening to the 4 presentations, I think there were a few things came back to me repeatedly. Engagement, collective approach, communication, education, awareness raising, and then incentives, the appropriate incentives as well. Now, I'm very conscious that we're meant to be back to plenary probably already. I'd be very happy to stay here and have a discussion with you all, but I'm conscious you may want to get back there. So could I ask the panel maybe just to come up to the front for a minute or two, and we'll take maybe, say, 5 minutes for questions from the floor, please. Yeah, and if we can get a microphone up to the front here, please. Okay, I'm told the plenary is back in session, so we'll keep it maybe to 3 questions, if you could, please.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Alan Moore from Hedgerows Ireland. Daire, just to thank you for highlighting the issue with incentivisation in Pillar 1 eco schemes. The 680,000 kilometres of existing hedgerows in this country are a massive resource that are not well managed, and only about a third are in good condition. So our group are continuing to petition in the hope that in the Pillar 1 eco schemes, which would have 130,000 odd recipients, better management, less intensive management of existing hedgerows, which would tick all the boxes for carbon, biodiversity, flood, shade, shelter, could still be introduced even at this late stage. But I'd like your comments on that, please.
Well, yes. So we know the wider, the taller the hedgerows are, the better they are for biodiversity. The greater diversity within the hedgerow, the better it is for biodiversity. We're seeing now with the farm carbon preliminary results is that the more space you have for hedgerow, the greater carbon it is sequestering. If you top and tail your hedgerow every year, you have a store of carbon, but you're not sequestering carbon. And because the majority of our hedgerows, on intensive land in particular, is being managed intensively, then these hedgerows are likely to be a net source of carbon as relative to 2005 or whatever the baseline figure, as opposed to a net sink. So I do think there's an opportunity there, as opposed to always going down the route of new measures. And this, I was also going to make a similar comment for Kevin Collins, going down the route of retaining what we have and improving the quality of what we have. And the hedgerow, I would think, is a no-brainer for its multifunctionality in relation to carbon storage and biodiversity.
Thanks. We have a lady at the front, I think. You had a question?
Hi, Roisin Byrne, nature-based landscape architect, and I'm also working on the Connecting Nature project. It's a Horizon project. I see a lot of information here, and I'm just wondering, is it, particularly the uplands, is that kind of collected as open source? Do you know what I mean? If I want to know as a farmer how to mind my gorse or a bracken, all of that basic information, is that available open source, or will it be available? I know it's very localized, and that's a good thing, and the community building is really good, but they're all great case studies, what everyone's doing. So are we sharing that information open source?
Yeah, does anyone want to come in on that?
Yeah, well, with regards to our training that we do the farmers, a lot of it is actually available on our website. Yeah, there are videos. So we actually did webinars because of COVID, and we realised very quickly with farmers, farmers don't like doing online stuff with us, lads. They love meeting in person, and they love having the chat as well, because they can go, what did you say about that? That's exactly what they would do, you know. So yeah, we actually recorded them. They're available on our website.
Yeah, we have. We're also we're not quite as far advanced, but we've done some training sessions with the farmers, so they're on our YouTube website. So so the idea is to put it all up, make it available. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Aoife Cassidy, farmer in Clare. I'm farming extensively, so I'm one of those farms that doesn't really show up economically on the farming radar. The market doesn't work for me at all, so I would just encourage people like yourself, Daire, to not underestimate your own personal power in pushing forward what you were saying about ecosystem service and placing an economic value on nature, because that's really encouraging for someone like me who is a practitioner. trying to make ends meet in a kind of a semi-natural habitat. The other point I'd make is that I'm a member of the GLOS scheme, and I'm a member of the BPS scheme, and I'm a member of what other one, organic farming scheme, all these schemes. Except I got a printout from the Department of Agriculture outlining the area of semi-natural woodland on my farm and penalising me financially for it. So I'm not sure if you're aware that that's actually happening, because you were saying something like a perverse incentive to get rid of natural features. Well, that incentive comes directly from the department to me in my letterbox.
No, I'm sure Pamela or Ted could answer better. There have been significant improvements in relation to eligibility and which habitats are being eligible, and there's significant advances have been made by the department in relation to the CAP strategic plan. Unfortunately, a response from Commission has been questionable, but hopefully it's just a terminology thing. But I assume Pam or Ted might be able to answer this question better.
Yeah, I might leave it to you, Pam.
Yeah, it seems to be a language issue on the response from the Commission. But yeah, we agree that there has been some policies in place that would incentivise removal of such areas. But under the next CAP programming period, we will be able to facilitate greater area of non-productive areas to be retained on the farmland. And these areas will also be eligible for payment under certain agri-environmental actions as well going forward.
I think the term non-productive is
Terrible.
No, I agree. I know it's terrible. Sorry.
It's a European term, so that's why we use it, but it's a terrible term. Yeah.
Now, I'm conscious I said I'd take 3 questions. I see about 5 people jumping up with a question. If people want to leave to go back to plenary now, that's fine. If people want to say, we'll take another 2 questions, and that might be it. So, Ian, I can see you have your hand raised, and then we'll take the lady over here.
Ian Lumley with Antashka. I represent Antashka on the CAP stakeholder group. So, and it's we very much appreciate what you said on behalf of Teagasc there, how the previous environmental schemes have failed because they haven't been landscaped or area based. They haven't delivered measurable results. That's just in Ireland. That's across Europe, as we know in the report in 2020 that you cited, the European Court of Auditors. So the European taxpayer is not going to be very happy with the continued support of schemes that are not delivering results in nature conservation. So I'm very pleased to say that Antashka is directly involved itself through a land holding which we've been bequeathed on the Tyrone-Monaghan border, where we're initiating an eco-grazing scheme. We have the Marina grass problem, which you mentioned there, the McGillicuddy Reeks. So the really positive thing is that all these things are happening around the country. But in many cases, we're doing things, starting up and trying to learn about it, like peatland restoration or whatever it may be. So how can we establish better cooperative structures to make these large-scale, area-based schemes that we need easier for everybody involved, for the partnerships between the landowners and everybody else that needs to be involved? Because we have the model from the early 20th century of the dairy co-op movement. Ireland was a world leader, but of course the Irish dairy industry is now a polluting nightmare that needs to radically destock dairy numbers. So that's not the... That's something that I'm sure that some dairy industry people, if they were in the room here, which I suspect they're not, wouldn't be happy to hear. But the co-op model, and I'm particularly interested to see that your nature restoration initiative is based on the co-op model. How can we use that co-op model more effectively so that we're able to link in with the McGillicuddy Reeks and replicate those, and the Burn and all those other schemes, that we can replicate those principles where appropriate in land use in other areas?
Pamela, maybe to begin.
Just firstly to say that the cooperative approach is something that we've seen work very successfully under the European Innovation Partnerships and the LIFE projects that the department are associated beneficiaries on, and that's the model that we're proposing for our cooperative ACM. And we find that we imagine that this will be a success because of the fact that there will be cooperative teams in these regions which will act as the core go-to point for the farmers on the ground. We'll have two-way communication with those farmers, and also two-way communication with ourselves, the department, and the other government bodies that are involved in these projects, using the cooperative model for successful delivery for environment.
I should also say, I don't know who said previous schemes have failed. I didn't say previous schemes have failed. I'm saying that these new approaches will be definitely an improvement on previous schemes.
Also, you're right that the targeted area-based schemes failed, but overall, all the funding for nature as part of CAP, failed in overall objectives. I mean, that was what the Court of Audit said.
The Court of Audit, it didn't.
So
Yeah.
But I think it's important to note as well that we're all available. I mean, since I came in, I remember my first time visiting the Burn, and I talked about meeting Michael Davern and Brendan Dunford and being inspired. But when I pick up the phone, even to Derek McLaughlin, or to any of my colleagues at all, they all share the information. So I think just make contact. They will make so much time because they just want to share their learnings as well. So I think everybody's in it together, not to think, I mean, now that I've met the lads, Pamela, you're like, I know who's going to be on my hit list of people to torment. Yeah.
Okay, and then the final question over here, please.
Thanks. My name is Carol. I'm the Mulcahy IP, and I want to compliment the 4 speakers. Your passion was exemplary in all 4 of you. But I have a question for Pamela and a comment for Patricia, okay? Pamela, you had the soil sampling programme which you ran last year, which we were absolutely delighted with down in the Mulcahy because we got our 65 participant farmers onto that and got soil sampling done. And I welcome your 2 new initiatives, the biodiversity mapping and your other scheme, the training for the farmers, which is great. It's something we would be encouraging. But soil samples that were taken back in January and February, the results still haven't been received, and we're doing management nutrient plans for farmers, and now slurry has gone out, chemical fertiliser has gone out. Just to be mindful, Pamela, if you're going to run these schemes, they need to be operated efficiently. I think you were probably under-resourced or whatever. The soil samples were taken pretty fast, but the results haven't been got, and I've been trying to chase them up for the farmers. And I know you also did E. coli and carbon storage, and you did say that they would be later in the year, but I'm just talking P's and K's and pH. We can't get them. Yeah. Just a comment for the new schemes. You know what I mean? They have to work on the ground. And just for Patricia, Douglas is coming to the Mulcahy all his holidays going forward. Okay.
Right, thanks, Emer, and I might talk to you directly about those. Those sample results should be back by now, but look, we can pick up on that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and we certainly appreciate any feedback that we're getting from any of these very new schemes that we're rolling out at the moment. So that feedback is very appreciated, and we will take it on board going forward. The majority of the soil results, as I understand, should have returned by now, so we will discuss it separately with you.
I suppose a challenge for us in rolling out a pilot is, it's something we're doing for the first time. It's something we're hoping to learn from in our experiences, and sometimes the likes of that pilot, it was probably overly ambitious. We let too many farmers join it as a pilot, but look, it's been very positive, and we're hoping to roll out a further tranche now shortly. Look, I'm conscious we're way over time. I really appreciate you staying and sitting through. I'd like to just ask you to give a round of applause for the 4 excellent speakers. Okay, thanks very much, guys.